Well, at 2:19 p.m. on Saturday, 4 hours before heading to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, Donald Trump became the first president of the United States in history to complain publicly of too much work. Donald Trump has decided that the war he started with Iran is now too much work after 58 days. Donald Trump also became the first president of the United States in history to complain of too much time wasted on traveling, and that's traveling in negotiating the end of a war. During World War II, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt spent several days traveling from Washington via airplane and ship for his first meeting with his most important allies in that war, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. And the meeting was in, of all places, Iran. President Roosevelt flew by plane to South America, having to make fueling stops along the way, and then by ship from South America to North Africa, and then by plane again to Iran. And every minute of that time, along with every minute of his presidency, President Roosevelt was suffering the effects of polio, which left his legs almost totally paralyzed, left him in a wheelchair. And he never complained of too much time wasted on traveling. President Roosevelt's final overseas trip during World War II to meet with the Allied leadership was to Ukraine, then part of the Soviet Union. The trip from Washington, D.C. to Yalta, taken by plane, ship, and several hours of driving, was the longest trip ever taken by a president of the United States. President Roosevelt died months after that trip without ever having complained about too much time wasted on traveling or too much work. Donald Trump canceled negotiations with Iranians when he issued that complaint of too much work. He said, "I just canceled the trip of my representatives going to Islamabad, Pakistan to meet with the Iranians. Too much time wasted on traveling, too much work. Besides which, there is tremendous infighting and confusion within their leadership. Nobody knows who is in charge, including them. Also, we have all the cards. They have none, exclamation point. If they want to talk, all they have to do is call, exclamation point." And so there is the Trump so-called negotiating style on full display. Donald Trump claiming to have all the cards when one of the cards he does not have is the Strait of Hormuz. And with the Strait of Hormuz closed in response to Donald Trump's war in Iran, the price of oil has skyrocketed. The price of gas in the United States has skyrocketed. And a new poll shows that 77% blame Donald Trump for the rise in gas prices. Secretary of State John Kerry negotiated with Iran for years, which ended in a written agreement in which Iran said, quote, "Iran reaffirms that under no circumstances will Iran ever seek, develop, or acquire any nuclear weapons." That agreement contained very strict monitoring of Iran's use of nuclear material so that it could never be used for weapons and only used for nuclear power and other research, as is done by many other countries around the world. And John Kerry never complained of too much time wasted on traveling. John Kerry never complained of too much work. John Kerry and President Obama achieved the greatest diplomatic breakthrough of our lifetimes. John Kerry did that by traveling as much as necessary. President Obama traveled as much as necessary. And by doing the careful work of multi-layered diplomacy and negotiation without ever tweeting empty threats to Iran, without ever tweeting threats of committing war crimes against Iran, which is in and of itself a war crime. At the beginning of Donald Trump's war, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz tried to stay out of Donald Trump's line of fire while sharing the European consensus not to get involved in Donald Trump's war. At the outset, the Chancellor refused to criticize Donald Trump's war by saying, "Now is not the time to lecture our partners and allies." Well, that was then, and this is now. German Chancellor Merz saying Donald Trump has been humiliated.
Ich erkenne im Augenblick nicht, welche
At the moment, I can't tell what strategic exit the Americans are pursuing, especially since the Iranians are obviously negotiating very skillfully, or perhaps very skillfully refusing to negotiate. and then letting the Americans travel to Islamabad only to send them back without any results. An entire nation is being humiliated by the Iranian leadership, especially by these so-called revolutionary guards. After Donald Trump put out his social media complaint that negotiating with Iranians was too much work, and he was calling it off, he then told reporters this as he was boarding Air Force One.
They gave us a paper that should have been better. And interestingly, immediately when I canceled it, within 10 minutes, we got a new paper that was much better.
Much better. So there's Donald Trump characterizing a new proposal from Iran as much better. And here is what Donald Trump's Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said about that much better proposal.
If what they mean by opening the straits is, yes, the straits are opened as long as you coordinate with Iran, get our permission, or we'll blow you up, and you pay us, that's not opening the straits. Those are international waterways. They cannot normalize, nor can we tolerate them trying to normalize a system in which the Iranians decide who gets to use an international waterway and how much you have to pay them to use it.
And so, as usual, the Iranians are hearing diplomatic chaos from the American side, with Donald Trump saying the offer is much better and Marco Rubio saying the opposite. Donald Trump did not think it was too much work today to meet with someone who, like J.D. Vance, has a very fancy title with absolutely nothing to do. Of course, if Charles were related to Donald Trump, he would refuse to meet with Donald Trump, just as King Charles refuses to meet with his brother because of his brother Andrew's long friendship with the man who was Donald Trump's closest friend for 10 years, sex trafficker and raper of children, Jeffrey Epstein. Leading off our discussion tonight is Senator Adam Schiff, Democrat of California. He's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee and former chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Senator Schiff, thank you very much for joining us tonight. There's such a mirror there with Donald Trump accusing Iran of creating a situation where they don't know who's in charge. And then you hear Donald Trump's Secretary of State disagreeing with Donald Trump about the latest so-called offer from Iran.
That's exactly right. And it's so ironic, given the criticism they're making of the Iranian regime, that they're divided. When you hear within the Trump administration all these divisions, in that exchange, I think Rubio is exactly right. It would be an intolerable resolution if Iran gets to control the strait, they get to charge a toll. And bear in mind, that was not the case before this war. So at this point, it seems like the administration is hoping just to get back to the status quo ante before this war, that is, Iran not able to charge tolls. But, considering all of the expense, all of the tragic loss of service members, to have a result, to strive for a result that is basically what it was before the war, just shows you how little thought went into this war to begin with, how little understanding of why we're at war or how this was going to end. But it's not just the Iranians that are struggling to come up with a coherent theory. It is certainly the administration, let alone a coherent strategy to end the conflict.
And it doesn't seem like there's even an aspiration on the Trump side to achieve a deal nearly as good as what President Obama and John Kerry achieved. Have you heard any particulars about what the administration would insist they must have in a deal?
Well, I've seen some reporting that they want Iran to forswear their enrichment program for some period of time, and there's a debate about how long that would be. But what I found most, almost comedic about this is Trump trying to distinguish what he was trying to negotiate with the Iranians from what Obama did with the JCPOA, in saying something along the lines of, oh, no, this is very different because now we're getting an ironclad promise from Iran that they won't develop the bomb. Oh, okay, well, if Iran's willing to make a promise now, I guess that is very different. You can see the president is looking for anything that he can declare victory with and somehow persuade the country that it's better than the agreement he tore up. But again, I think the principal challenge here is the president doesn't have the patience for diplomacy. He doesn't have the patience for war either. He just wants it to be over. Look, we all want it to be over, but unless you go through the kind of intensive negotiations that stretch on for weeks and months, it's going to be very hard to strike any kind of meaningful deal with Iran. When you talk to experts and they hear, Trump saying that, well, we negotiated for 20 hours in Islamabad as if that's some big deal. Negotiations go on for 20 weeks routinely on something that difficult or more. So the idea that, well, we put in 20 hours and now we don't want to go back because it's too far to go and too much work. They just don't have the kind of strategic patience that the Iranians do. And that's not going to lead to a good result.
Well, that's it, Senator. What happens with the other side in a negotiation like this, an international negotiation, when you hear one side saying it's too much work, it's too much travel?
Well, the Iranians have to be very heartened to hear those kind of comments. They have nothing if not staying power. And I think from the regime perspective, the United States threw its worst at Iran in terms of all the bombing and all the rest. And nevertheless, they retain the potential to close the strait when they choose to do so. The regime remains very much in power, even perhaps more hardline. And in the future, any inhibition they might have had about cracking down on their people because the U.S. might intervene is no longer a credible threat. So there's a very real risk here that Iran emerges empowered from this war. And yes, it's lost a lot of its military infrastructure that can be rebuilt, but nevertheless, they feel they've survived, that they've taken the worst, and now they have carte blanche to repress their population even further, or let alone close the strait. So, very difficult. This is why it's best to avoid, wars of choice, because you don't know how they're going to turn out. The things are unpredictable. And we're seeing the consequence of these unpredictable repercussions.
Senator Adam Schiff, thank you very much for starting off our coverage tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
And coming up, Donald Trump now says that the ballroom he wants to illegally build on White House property should be the future site of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, even though, as big as it is, the Trump ballroom could only hold 1/4 of the people who were in the Washington Hilton ballroom on Saturday night. That's next. The Presidential Emergency Operations Center is the official name of the White House bunker. And now Donald Trump is using the events at the White House Correspondents' Dinner this weekend as a new reason for building a massive new White House bunker underneath an even more massive White House ballroom where Donald Trump wants to hold all future White House Correspondents' Dinners. In his column under the title, The Trouble with Trump's Bunker and Ballroom, Garrett Kraft notes that the Trump ballroom, as big as it is not nearly as big as the Hilton ballroom, which accommodates 2,600 people for the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Not to mention the fact that if the White House Correspondents' Dinner is on the White House campus, that means the President of the United States is in full control of the guest list and could easily ban any reporter who he thinks is a disgrace that day, which was the word he chose for 60 Minutes correspondent Norah O'Donnell on Sunday in her interview with him. Garrett Kraft's 2017 book, Raven Rock, details the history of the White House bunker, which was built during World War II and never seriously used until 9/11, when Vice President Dick Cheney was lifted out of his chair by Secret Service agents and hustled down to the bunker. The White House bunker was designed to be a short-term location for the president or vice president in the event of protracted danger or anything like nuclear war. The real bunker for a situation like that is the Raven Rock bunker in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. That's where a backup version of the Pentagon exists. And there's another presidential emergency bunker in the hills of Virginia. There's also the option of getting the president in the sky on Air Force One, as the choice that was made on 9/11. So the White House bunker was always designed as a place to get the president out of as quickly as possible, which is why there is a special crew located outside of the potential blast range of a nuclear weapon whose sole job is to close in on the remains of the White House with bulldozers and other equipment to extract the president from the bunker as quickly as possible. The security principle being that the president should not remain in the one location where everyone thinks he is, even if he is underground, which makes Donald Trump's description of the bunker he wants to build all the more strange. Now, Donald Trump has said, we have secure telecommunications and communications all over. We have bomb shelters that we're building. We have a hospital and very major medical facilities that we're building. We have all of these things in his new bunker. He wants to have all of those things. Donald Trump wants all of those things in his new bunker with no authorization from Congress whatsoever. Garrett Graff points out that Donald Trump's design for a massive new bunker on the White House grounds, quote, would run counter to literally decades of presidential continuity planning and evacuation plans, all of which hold that the most important thing is to get the president out of the identifiable known location of the White House and into motion, either to a bunker or aircraft where he would be harder to locate and target. The whole point of the presidential evacuation and continuity of the presidency planning is you want to get the president out of the place where everyone knows where he is and get him into a place where people don't know where he is. The last thing we should be doing is investing in a new giant bunker facility at the place most readily identifiable with where the president is. The only thing built after Ronald Reagan was shot in the driveway of the Washington Hilton, where the White House Correspondents' Dinner takes place, was a new enclosure around that driveway so that the presidential limousine could pull up to the door with the full protection of that enclosure. Ronald Reagan didn't think getting shot in that situation was a reason for him to change anything at the White House. And Ronald Reagan went back to the Washington Hilton for the White House Correspondents' Dinner 7 times after he was shot entering that same hotel. Joining us now is Garrett Graff, journalist and historian, covers federal law enforcement. He is the author of Watergate, A New History. Garrett, as you can have every right to suspect, almost everything I know about the bunker, I was reading from you today in your new column about it. Take us through that. Take us through what could the function of this kind of bunker, how could it possibly make sense to do this, given all the principles that you show us have guided the placement of the bunker that's there?
Yeah, so we have to start with the first obvious caveat that it's impossible to know when Donald Trump is talking about something, whether he's talking about something that's real, entirely invented, or merely hyperbole, sort of somewhere in between. And so it's hard to parse exactly what he's been saying about the bunker and what it is concealed underneath the ballroom that he is planning to build in that now deconstructed East Wing. But what we know from him is a greater level of detail than any president has ever talked about the presidential bunker, that Presidential Emergency Operations Center before. And in the way that he is talking about building this massive bunker, to use his words, with medical facilities, special communications systems, it certainly sounds something larger than we have ever seen that White House bunker before. The PIOC, as it is known, is a relatively small facility. It's set up for, on the order of dozens of staff, not scores, certainly not 100 or more. And it's meant to be a facility where the president could spend a couple of hours while the military and the Secret Service figure out the long-term or medium-term evacuation plans. Actually, when Dick Cheney, First Lady Laura Bush, and other administration officials were gathered in that bunker on 9/11, there were so many people who were crammed in that oxygen levels began to drop dangerously low. Carbon dioxide began to fill the bunker, and they actually had to send some officials out in order for there to be enough air inside for everyone to breathe.
The fact that there are these other bunkers and vast versions of them that I didn't understand the details of at all until I read them from you today is the very clear proof, along with the actual design of the current White House bunker, that the president is not supposed to hang around at that ground zero location.
Absolutely, and it's hard to even really imagine when he's talking about, superb medical facilities, what the purpose of that would be. The White House does have, basic and advanced medical facilities already. And of course, as with when President Reagan was shot, he was taken immediately to the trauma center at the George Washington University Hospital. There are very good, fully staffed trauma centers across the Washington region that are available for the president as needed. And again, it's just hard to imagine what the scenario is where a president would need to be sort of sequestered in a bunker under the White House for any long-standing period of time.
And Garrett, your point about how small, compared only to the Washington Hilton Ballroom, the Trump Ballroom would be, shows that any possibility of having that be a location for White House Correspondents' dinner size event is ridiculous.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing, Donald Trump has said that, this is a facility that presidents have wanted for hundreds of years, leaving aside that that's not something that, we have seen presidents clamor for in the past. Really what worries me and sort of bothers me about this from an optics standpoint is the idea that the president in a democracy is unable to leave the White House grounds to interact with the citizens. And that basically, if you want an audience with the president, you have to come as a supplicant at his invitation to his own facility. And that's just not the way that presidential events have ever been staged or imagined in the past.
Garrett Graff, thank you very much for your reporting, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Always a pleasure, Lawrence.
And coming up, Republican members of Congress now want to immediately approve legislation forcing the American people to pay for Donald Trump's ballroom without asking a single question about the costs of the ballroom. That's next with Congressman Brendan Boyle. Yesterday afternoon, Republican Senator Tim Sheehy of Montana said he would now like the United States Senate to authorize and pay for Donald Trump's new White House ballroom, and to do so without 1 minute of hearings to evaluate anything about that project. Senator Sheehy wrote, "This week I will introduce and seek unanimous consent for legislation providing express approval for construction of a presidential ballroom. It is an embarrassment to the strongest nation on earth that we cannot host gatherings in our nation's capital, including ones attended by our president, without the threat of violence and attempted assassinations." Senator Sheehy apparently does not consider it an embarrassment that federal law, which he has a hand in writing, has done nothing to prevent American assassins of elementary school children or would-be assassins of presidents from being the best equipped assassins in the world. And Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican senator, now wants the Senate to vote to fund Donald Trump's ballroom, saying, "I'll bet you 90% of the people would love to have a better facility than the Hilton Hotel to make sure this crap never happens again. There are people out there just one click away from picking up a gun." Senator Graham does not want to do anything that would prevent those people from being able to pick up a gun. Senator Graham is not worried about those people picking up a gun and heading to their nearest elementary school. At least he doesn't say that now. He's only concerned with people picking up a gun and heading in the direction of Washington events. Other congressional Republicans are now advocating legislation to authorize and pay for Donald Trump's ballroom in response to an attempted assassination, but as usual, will not consider even holding a hearing on any legislation of any kind that could make it even slightly more difficult for American assassins to obtain their weapons of choice. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania. He is the top Democrat on the House Budget Committee and a member of the powerful Ways and Means Committee. Congressman Boyle, what are the chances, as far as you can tell, of Congress stepping up here now and funding the Trump ballroom?
Well, it shows you, Lawrence, where Donald Trump and his Republican allies' actual priorities are. It is on garbage like this. You know, Lindsey Graham, you cited the quote moments ago. He said that 90% of the American people would like to see the ballroom. Actually, no, 90% of the American people would just like to see lower gas prices. 90% of the American people would like to see affordable health care. 90% of the American people would like to have affordable housing. You know, we're in an economy today which is actually now performing the worst it has since the Great Recession. The difference is when you measure consumer sentiment, people are actually more pessimistic about the economy today than they were during the Great Recession. So that's what the American people care about. It's a shame they don't have a president or a Republican majority who gives a damn about it.
What do you see in the budget vehicle that's moving through the Congress now that addresses anything that's happening in our economy now?
Well, nothing. You have now, the Senate sent over late last week their Reconciliation 2.0, what is sometimes nicknamed the skinny reconciliation, because it only pertains to the funding of ICE and CBP. It would be an additional $70 billion on top of the $140 billion record funding that they included in their reconciliation bill last year. And of course, there would be absolutely no reforms whatsoever to rein in these out-of-control agencies. Nothing in there about health care, nothing in there about lower gas prices, nothing in there about food prices, absolutely nothing for the vast majority of the American people.
Congressman Brendan Boyle, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And coming up, whatever you think of Trumpism in government, watching it from the outside, it is much worse on the inside. Our next guest was on the inside of the United States Agency for International Development when Elon Musk was lying about it in a situation that Bill Gates described then as the world's richest man killing the world's poorest children. Nicholas Enrich tells that story from the inside in his important new book, Into the Wood Chipper, and he will join us next. If all else fails, your job is to bear witness. That was the advice President Biden's former Assistant Administrator for Global Health, Dr. Atul Gawande, gave to our next guest when Donald Trump and his then favorite billionaire, Elon Musk, were destroying the United States Agency for International Development and, as Elon Musk phrased it, throwing USAID, quote, into the wood chipper. Into the Wood Chipper is now the title of Nicholas Enrich's important new book about the destruction of USAID by Elon Musk, which was described at the time by Bill Gates, whose foundation has done important work with USAID, as, quote, the world's richest man killing the world's poorest children. Nicholas Enrich remained at USAID for the first weeks of the Trump administration, serving as acting assistant administrator for global health at USAID. When he was put on administrative leave, the New York Times published memos he had written. He told the New York Times, quote, he hoped it'll be clear that we were never actually given the opportunity to implement life-saving humanitarian assistance. In Nicholas Enrich's account, when Elon Musk said this in the Oval Office in February of 2025, Elon Musk was lying.
And we have, for example, turned on funding for Ebola prevention and for HIV prevention.
In his new book, Nicholas Enrich sheds light on Elon Musk's lie this way. It was exactly 1 month into the Trump administration. We were trying to respond to a deadly Ebola outbreak in Uganda. Had been trying for weeks, but we had been stymied at every turn. The night before, Trump's USAID leaders finally agreed to our plan to send 27,000 sets of personal protective equipment into the outbreak zone, except there was a catch. They wouldn't authorize a payment to release the PPE from the Kenyan warehouse where it was being stored. Instead, they ordered me to go get the supplies myself. I had tried to explain that was not how we operate. Even if I could get there and had a license to drive a truck, I was not authorized to transport the PPE across the Ugandan border. Besides, sending me to do all this would cost more than the nominal transfer fee. We had already paid for the PPE, we just needed to move it. This is why USAID contracts for this type of service, I explained. But my new bosses were not convinced. They insisted I had to go pick it up and make the delivery. Oh, and one more thing. They gave me 12 hours to get it done. This was ridiculous. What was I supposed to do? Fly to Kenya and break into the warehouse with a crowbar? There were so many reasons this was not legal or feasible. As far as I am aware, those 27,000 sets of PPE are still sitting in the World Health Organization warehouse today, gathering dust and waiting to expire. All I know is they never made it to Uganda. A nonstop flight from Washington Dulles Airport to Kenya would take 13 hours, but there are no nonstops from the United States to Kenya. Joining us now is Nicholas Enrich, author of the important new book, Into the Wood Chipper, a whistleblower's account of how the Trump administration shredded USAID. Thank you very much for joining us. This is our second discussion of this book, which I I don't do that very often, but this is as important a book as I've read about what Donald Trump has done. Because when you're trying to pick your cruelties, I can find nothing worse than taking food away from starving children, taking life-saving medicine away from people around the world, especially in Africa, as they did. You were there. What are the worst things you saw?
Well, I guess maybe the worst things that I saw that really kept me up at night at the time were when they would ignore warnings that were directly threatening U.S. national security. So just to stay on that example that you read from the book about the Uganda Ebola outbreak, they wouldn't even allow us to screen passengers on international flights for symptoms of Ebola before getting on planes that potentially were going onward to the United States. That was just one example. But
why? Did anyone say why?
Because they would not, they didn't, well, yes, actually, one of the things that they told us was that Ebola is a scam.
Ebola is a scam. That was the official Musk gang view of the science.
Right. I mean, we were prepared to explain, the cost-benefit analysis of the...
Can I just stop for a second?
Yes,
because you shocked me. I got to say, so much of this shocks me, which is why you're here again.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea where that came from, the idea that Ebola is a scam?
Well, I think it came from a group of people who were not just ignorant about how global health works, but ignorant of international development in general, and really had no idea how government works. And this is what happens when you hollow out an agency of all of its expertise and replace it with a bunch of uninformed and unqualified sycophants.
What else? Ebola, what are the other things that you faced in those days?
Right. So another really terrifying example for me was when they froze foreign aid, just cutting off global health. They interrupted clinical trials where, for example, we were testing the new antibiotics against drug-resistant tuberculosis. And so when the treatment was cut off for those patients, it doesn't just put the lives of those patients at risk, it risks mutations of the virus. This is an airborne infectious disease that could no longer be treatable by our antibiotics of last resort. Again, that's a national security threat for the United States.
And they had no idea of any of this.
Well, when we told them, again, because they were so unable.
And who's the them? Like who are they?
This is both the political appointees and the Doge operatives.
And are these the 23-year-olds that we used to see the pictures of?
Exactly. These are those Gen Zers and their colleagues who really just had no idea how to operate. So when they heard us explain these risks, the fact was they had already broken the systems that we needed to have in place to actually turn those activities back on. And so they would end up just pointing fingers at each other. At one point, the chief of staff looked at the Doge folks and said, maybe this works at Twitter, but this is why you can't do this here.
Were there any moments where it seemed they understood any bit of the damage they did?
I think that there were moments when I was able to brief them on specific threats that were that were facing based on the cuts. Again, where we were unable to provide malaria services at the beginning of the rainy season, that was going to threaten to put us in a much worse position for one of the diseases that's the top killer of children around the world. But again, all they could really do was smack the table, blame the staff, and look around at each other because they did not know how to fix the mistakes that they had made because of their just general level of
was there a moment that was the moment that explains why you got pushed out the door?
I think the moment that I realized that I needed to speak out was when they terminated the last of our contracts. Until then, I had maintained hope that somehow I could convince them to restart at least some of our programs. But once Doge terminated en masse all of the contracts we would have needed to do that work, I realized that bearing witness was really the only thing that I could still do. And that's why I wrote those memos. And that's why I felt like I needed to tell the world what was happening at USAID.
We cannot thank you enough for bearing witness. Nicholas Enrich gets tonight's last word. His important book, Into the Wood Chipper, is simply the most important view we have seen of what Trumpism actually is inside government and how deeply cruel it can be.